This is the Extreme Stewardship Podcast, where we explore anything and everything that gets us better at making things good and good at making things better. At the moment, I'm trying to get better at rest. And one of the things I'm learning is that getting better at rest means putting rest into its proper place, which means establishing a proper rhythm between work and rest. But what I want to think about a little bit in this episode is that you and I always have multiple rhythms in play at any given moment. In the last episode, I said a few things about the liturgical calendar. The liturgical calendar was designed to put life rhythms, particularly yearly life rhythms, on track with what God has done and is doing in the world through Jesus. Times to feast, times to fast, and times to just get after it. But the specific things that might come to mind here that God is doing, like putting his church on mission in the world, those aren't the only things God is doing. Now watch this. When God set up Israel's calendar, he did so in an alignment with the calendar that he had already set up. I'm talking about agricultural and seasonal calendars. God didn't tell Israel to walk away from their crops and come up to Jerusalem right when the harvest should have been happening. He told them to harvest and then come celebrate. He also didn't say, hey, Israel, you're going to be different, so I want you to plant during everyone else's harvest and harvest while everyone else is planting. Israel's planting and harvest rhythms looked basically like everyone else's. So here's the one last principle of sacred time. There are multiple layers to our rhythms, and some of those layers are going to look like the rhythms of every high-functioning human being on the planet, whether or not they acknowledge God. There's this thing called general revelation, things God has revealed to everyone, whether they worship him or not. Planting at the proper time and harvesting at the proper time is one of those things. Now, here's what I mean in practice. I mean, at any given moment, I have multiple angles to consider as far as where I am on the yearly rhythm. I'm writing this on July 10th. Liturgically, that means ordinary time. That means I'm getting after it in a way that treats all of life like a life on mission with God. Agriculturally, for my family, that means watering and weeding and some harvesting, mostly keeping an eye on the garden and the grass to make sure things are staying healthy as God provides the growth. Professionally, I'm a teacher, which means I'm on summer break. It doesn't mean no work, since obviously I'm sitting in my kitchen writing this podcast episode, but I'm sitting at home in my kitchen writing this episode. Fewer meetings, no grading, definitely some planning for the fall semester, but nothing due tomorrow. I'm also a husband and a father of elementary age kids. That means July involves things like being on summer break, like traveling out of town to see extended family and having extended family travel from out of town to see us. So I have a liturgical rhythm, an agricultural rhythm, a professional rhythm, and a familial rhythm all coming together. And as I try to lean into how they work together, how my life is a constant interaction between these things, I'm learning a couple things that might be helpful for you as well. The main thing I'm learning is the need to be intentional. It's a cliche because it's true. Hope for the best is not a strategy. I need to be intentional, first of all, about naming my rhythms. I'm not talking about out-of-the-blue catastrophes. I'm talking about the normal stuff that happens all the time that overwhelms us because we didn't see it coming, even though we should have seen it coming. I was playing basketball with some guys one afternoon, and one of them, and this is a guy who was on a Division III roster at the time, he was having a rough day, and he kept saying, I don't know why I'm dragging like this today. And then toward the end of the game, he said, I don't know, maybe it was the 3 beers I had at lunch. You think? Sounds dumb, right? But is it any different when it's finals week on campus and I'm teaching a Sunday school class at church and I'm angry at my sprinkler system that isn't working properly and it's going to get hot soon, and now I'm at my son's baseball practice for the 4th night in a row and I'm saying to the dad sitting next to me, I don't know why I'm so tired. Well, that's dumb. I'm tired because I haven't named my rhythms. I've got professional and familial and liturgical and agricultural rhythms all coming into their most intense seasons at the same time. How did I not see that coming? Doesn't spring baseball always happen in the spring? Don't the sprinklers always need some work after having been off all winter? Aren't I always a little beat up by the end of the academic year? Why is any of this surprising to me? If I'd named my rhythms, it wouldn't have been a surprise. I would have seen it coming. And if I'd seen it coming, at a minimum, I would have handled it better. And more likely, I'd have done some things differently. So that's the first thing. What are the rhythms of, for example, my yearly existence? I have to ask and answer that question. And once I've been intentional about naming my rhythms, then I can be intentional about prioritizing them. It's like what John Maxwell said about budgeting. A budget is telling your money where to go instead of wondering where it went. You first had to know how much money was there in the first place. We first have to know what our rhythms are in the first place. And once that's in front of us, we can make some intentional decisions about them. Well, but what decisions are those? Well, it might be a decision to opt out of certain rhythms, or at least minimize my participation in them. I live in 21st century America. I can buy produce at the store any time of the year. I don't have to grow my own food. I could sell my house and live in an apartment and not have to fix sprinklers anymore. I could move to a mild climate where I don't have to make fire lines in the summer or shovel snow in the winter. I could do a lot of things to minimize my participation in seasonal rhythms. Now, I happen to think this is a terrible idea. I think fleeing from the rhythms that are hardwired into God's material creation is one of the worst moves we could make. But I could make that move if my intentional goal was to take seasonal rhythms off the table when trying to construct my life in an ideal way. Now, more than likely, the best move isn't to opt out of a certain rhythm, but to adjust it in relation to the other rhythms. Maybe we have a slightly smaller garden because the intense gardening season is the same as the intense teaching season. I'm downsizing to accommodate other rhythms, but I'm still participating in that rhythm so that my family can enjoy the various benefits of growing our own food to some reasonable extent. Or maybe we do summer baseball instead of spring baseball. Or maybe we do cross country in the fall instead of baseball at all. We have to be realistic about what's adjustable and what isn't. The timing of planting and harvest isn't adjustable, but the volume is, whereas youth sports is adjustable in both timing and volume. The basic flow of the academic year isn't changing to accommodate my other life rhythms, but there's a lot I can do, especially as a college professor, to minimize the intensity of different portions of that year. How many professors have looked at the grading pile the day after the end of the term and thought, why in the world did I assign that paper? And liturgical rhythms, well, we're not moving Christmas to March because it's more convenient for you. But if I'm a tax accountant, there's nothing wrong with me opting out of the Easter choir because the first 2 weeks of April are when my professional rhythms hit their peak. On the other hand, if my family really values participation in Advent stuff at our local church, I'm probably not going to moonlight as a ski instructor in December. If I love Advent and I love being a ski instructor, I can hit the slopes harder in January and February. If I've been intentional about naming my rhythms, and I've been intentional about prioritizing my rhythms, now I have to be intentional about communicating my rhythms. This one starts at home. If I know that early May is crazy because it's finals week and graduation and all that, but Annie and I have never talked about how to navigate that at home, we're going to have some problems. If I've decided that every Friday morning at the office is leave me alone so I can get some work done time, and yes, I'm assuming that I have the ability to make that decision, so let's go with that for the sake of the illustration. If that's my rhythm, but I don't communicate that rhythm to my coworkers or my boss or my subordinates, I'm going to be frustrated every time someone knocks on my door on a Friday morning. Now, here's a hypothetical scenario. I decide, hypothetically, that I'd really like to be in my office by 8:15 a.m. Class begins at 9, so being there 45 minutes in advance gives me enough time to get my head in the right space, make last-minute adjustments to the lesson plan, make sure I have all the technology, handouts, Bible, graded assignments to return, all that. It takes about 20 minutes to drive from my house to campus, then add a couple of minutes to get from the parking lot to my office. So I should be driving away from my house by 7:50 at the latest. But let's say, hypothetically, of course, that I don't communicate all this to my family. At 7:45, I'm starting to steam because my wife is still upstairs getting herself ready while I'm feeding the kids. I haven't made my lunch. I haven't brushed my teeth. I may or may not know where my keys and wallet and phone are. At 7:55, I'm passively aggressively trying to get the point across to my wife that I'm late and it's her fault. It's not her fault, by the way. My daughter wants her 7th goodbye hug, and my sons want me to settle an argument about who should get to bat first in the wiffle ball game, when in fact they should not be playing wiffle ball. They should be doing their morning chores and getting ready for school. This is all hypothetical, of course, but let's say all this happens. And by the time I get on the road at 8:10 a.m., I'm mad because my rhythms are not what I need them to be. Annie is mad because the kids are not doing what they're supposed to be doing. The kids are mad because mom and dad are clearly stressed and overreacting to what they perceive to be minor infractions, if infractions at all. And by the time I get halfway down our hill, I realize I forgot something because I was too distracted when I finally walked out the door. So I have to turn around and go back and waste more time. And by the time I get to the school parking lot, I'm mostly over it. I grit my teeth and decide that I can get my head in the teaching game in 20 minutes instead of 45, so it's not that big of a deal. Sometimes that's true. Other times I realize I haven't entered those grades into the grade book, so I can't return the assignments unless I make that happen before 9 a.m., and then I realize I forgot to make copies of the quiz, so I need to do that, except other classes start at 9 a.m., and therefore other professors need the copier between now and then, so now I'm even more mad, and that's going to affect the rest of my day. Now, I'm willing to bet this hypothetical scenario isn't all that hypothetical for you. It certainly isn't for me. It happens all the time. And it happens because I did the hard work of naming my rhythms. I did the hard work of prioritizing my rhythms. And then I failed to do the easy work of communicating this particular part of my rhythms to my family. Would it be an extreme hardship on my family to plan around me leaving at 7:50 instead of 8:10? No, not even a little bit. My wife knows I need time before class to get in the proper headspace. She knows that when I walk into the garage with 3 kids hanging on me and she and I are trying to have a significant conversation and I'm stressed because I feel behind, this doesn't work. She knows all this. She understands all this. And she 100% wants to help me work within my rhythms. All I have to do is clearly communicate, I need to be on the road at 7:50 and here's why. And then, of course, do my part to make that possible. But the whole messy, stressful, frustrating scenario that unfolds so frequently only does because I didn't communicate my rhythms. So I name my rhythms, I prioritize my rhythms, I communicate my rhythms. The last thing I've got to do is adjust my rhythms. I can't make all the decisions about life rhythms once and then stick to my guns until I die. I have to constantly check in, see what's working, what isn't, make incremental improvements, own mistakes, and celebrate victories, all that. And I won't go all the way down the rabbit hole on how to do that. There's more could be said here than I'm going to cover in one episode of one podcast. But I think there are 2 overarching questions that can point us in the right direction. First question, can I articulate at any given moment which rhythms are at work and which rhythms are at rest? It's Sunday morning at 9:30. I'm sitting with my family in the big room. Sorry, I have theological problems with calling it the sanctuary or the worship center. I'm sitting with my family at Northview Bible Church, listening to Norm Schwab preach. Family rhythm is in work mode because I'm teaching my young kids how to sit in that space and participate in what's going on there. Professional rhythm is supposed to be in rest mode. I've worked all week in that capacity. I've put a to-do list on my desk that I'll see when I get back to the office on Monday morning, and I can enjoy some distance from those tasks until then. Liturgical rhythm is in rest mode because Norm is preaching and I'm not. Bill is leading singing and I'm not. Louie is doing announcements and I'm not. I'm enjoying being with God and with his people on Sunday, on Resurrection Day. But notice how many ways I can screw this up. I can go into professional work mode and critique the sermon because interpreting and communicating the Bible is what I do for a living. I can pass that time making to-do lists for the garden that afternoon or the office that week. I can either forget about my kids altogether or fixate on them completely. Now, this is just one small example, and there are thousands more. But the point is that I have to pause and ask myself what sorts of rhythms I should be inhabiting right now. And then I have to do a little self-evaluation to see if I'm on track or not. And then I have to make the necessary micro-adjustments. And of course, those adjustments need to be communicated to everyone whose rhythms intersect with mine. Now, that's actually the second question. How are my rhythms intersecting with the rhythms of the people around me? Maybe I feel great about my rhythms, but they're killing my wife or my coworkers because Their rhythms are different from mine, and there's a compatibility issue going on. Now, here's one way I think I've gotten this right. I used to play a lot of basketball. And then we started having kids while I was in grad school. Going to the gym 2 or 3 hours a night, 3 or 4 nights a week while being a graduate student with a newborn is not a workable rhythm for my wife and my son. So I started running. It costs almost no money, especially if you've read the book Born to Run. If you haven't, go now and do so. You can thank me later. The inexpensiveness of my exercise was critical to our family rhythms given my status as a graduate student. And with running, you can go from start to finish, including shower, in 30 or 40 minutes. This also was critical to our family rhythms given my status as a graduate student. And then I discovered that most beautiful of modern inventions, the jogging stroller. Now I could get good exercise, and in a relatively short amount of time, and at minimal cost, and I could get quality time with my son, which doubled as my wife getting quality time without my son. I definitely like basketball more than I like running, but that rhythm had to be adjusted because it wasn't compatible with Annie's and Sean's rhythms. So that's one rhythm adjustment that I think I got right. Here's one way I've frequently not gotten this right. My ideal day is one in which I get up early, work out, get cleaned up, make breakfast for my family, get the kids started on their chores, be at the office for 8 hours or so, come home, and stay home. I don't like going out in the evening. I don't like driving to baseball practice or VBS. I don't like getting home at 9:30 at night and having to choose between cleaning up the place or getting to bed at a decent hour. My preferred rhythm is to be at my house from 5 p.m. on 7 days a week. But we've been homeschooling these past couple of years, which means my wife and kids have been at the house for all the hours I've been gone, which means they're ready for a change of scenery, which means it's often good and desirable for them to leave home, whether it be for baseball practice or a birthday party or whatever. So now I have to make a choice. And it's a choice specifically about family rhythms, because the question, am I keeping my family home with me? Am I sending them away from home without me? Or am I going away from home with them? Is really the question, is my family rhythm in work mode from 5 to 8 p.m. or is it in rest mode? Well, it can't be in rest mode because I haven't done any work. I was in family work mode from 6 to 8 this morning, but then I stepped away from that work and my wife took over. And the best rhythm for our family as a whole is for me to step back into family work mode from dinner time to bedtime. Now, that doesn't mean we have to leave the house, and we almost certainly shouldn't leave the house every day, but it does mean that those other people in my house have rhythms that are somewhat different from mine, and it does mean that sometimes at least my rhythms need to adjust to theirs. Now, I can think of two really common, or at least two stereotypical situations in which inattentiveness to other people's rhythms has caused a lot of trouble. The first is the dad who comes home from the job site and plops on the couch in front of the TV until dinner time and maybe after dinner until bedtime. Mom, meanwhile, is continuing to do the same job she's been doing all day since he left, cooking, cleaning, parenting, etc. The problem is that he thinks his job is done for the day, that his rhythm is switching from work to rest. Now, that's wrong. His professional rhythm is switching from work to rest. His family rhythm should be switching from rest to work. And I say that because dad's rhythms intersect with mom's rhythms, and mom is still in work mode. And I would suggest, and I don't mind calling out some dads a little bit here, we need to be more conscious of our wives' rhythms at this point. As a general rule, I think we, husbands and wives, we work simultaneously and rest simultaneously unless we have specifically agreed to do otherwise. We set aside times that one of us carries the whole load temporarily so the other can rest. Absolutely. But most of the time, I don't move entirely into rest mode at the end of a day until Annie does as well. Now, if your family situation is such that mom gets rest during the day while dad is working, awesome. Maybe the early evening is the time for mom to return the favor. Dads, don't assume that's the case without asking. The other situation I'm seeing more and more has to do with employment. I see an unfortunate trend whereby new employees, to put it bluntly, new employees are asking for the rest of the company to rearrange their rhythms to accommodate them. Can I work these days instead of those? Can I work this shift instead of that? Can I not do that part of my job? Can I work remotely? Can I not come to work tomorrow because my girlfriend's parents' dog died? I'm not actually making that last one up. True story. Now, there are all kinds of things that we might say in these sorts of situations. There is such thing as a reasonable accommodation, and there is such a thing as an unreasonable accommodation. My point is that part of what's happening is a sort of pop psychology term that's been around for a couple of years, main character syndrome. Main character syndrome in this instance means I need to be a healthy individual on my terms, and I have figured out what works best for me. And since I'm the main character, since I'm at center stage, since what matters most of all is that I navigate life the way I think I should be able to navigate life, everyone else's rhythms need to be restructured around mine. Now, before you get all huffy about kids these days, because I know some of you are thinking about millennials and Gen Zers right now, keep in mind that what's going on here is exactly the same thing that's happening with the dad who comes home and says, I should be able to sit on the couch and watch the game while my wife keeps cleaning and cooking and parenting, which, by the way, she's been doing for exactly the same amount of time that I was either driving to work or at work or driving home from work today. I should be able to do that because I worked hard today and I'm tired. It's the same thing. It's the same problem. And the problem is that one person thinks their rhythm should come first and other people's rhythms should get into sync with theirs. All right. The point of this episode is that each of us has multiple rhythms going on simultaneously, and so does everybody else. That makes life complicated. But if we are intentional about naming our rhythms, prioritizing our rhythms, communicating our rhythms, and adjusting our rhythms, and doing all this with one eye on the rhythms of the people closest to us, we're going to get better over time at living in the healthy back and forth between work and rest that God designed us for in the first place. Thanks for listening to the Extreme Stewardship Podcast. My name is Michael Kibbe, and I teach Bible and theology at Great Northern University in Spokane, Washington. My behind-the-scenes partner in this project is my brother, Ben Kibbe. Our editor-in-chief is Liam Olmsted. Art comes from Leah Leanhoutz, and of course, music is provided by Dave Murray of Daradoon Guitars. If this series has been helpful or challenging to you, or if you've got a story about extreme stewardship that you'd be willing to share, shoot us an email, extremestewards@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. You are, of course, welcome to like and subscribe and tell your friends and all that. What we really care about is that you have gotten better at making things good and good at making things better.